welcome to Identity at the Center Live. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey Jeff, how's it going?
Oh, not so bad yourself.
Good, man. I remember when you told me, I wish I was more creative. And just watching that countdown thing, and I'm just like, fantastic. You're very creative.
It's a little bit of a playground, so we're still working the kinks out as we kind of do this thing, kind of a soft launch over the holidays here. But thank you.
I think it's cool that we are doing the soft launches. Let's just work the bugs out. When we did the recorded Identity Center podcast audio only, we worked the bugs out in real time, and everybody gets to now go back into the archives and watch us work those bugs out. And episode number one is still the most listened to, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's you and I have kind of talked about like what are we going to do about episode one, just because of the quality differences between one and 120, so that we are later. But I think it shows the journey, right? I mean, we kind of started with zero budget and zero tools and kind of figuring out as we went, but we got it. We got it. I think I'm comfortable with where it is right now, at least.
I think if you use Apple Podcasts and you were to try to get to episode one, I mean, we're at like what, 130 or something?
128, yeah.
128. And so if you wanted to scroll back to episode one, it would take a little, you might get some issues with your thumb, some carpal tunnel for the thumb.
Yeah, there's a lot of scrolling, but I think it's also a good time capsule, right, for the content that we had, over the last 2.5 years now. So the train keeps rolling, and now we're doing this live thing, and we've been doing this for a couple weeks. This is number 4, and this is really just kind of a more of I want to say unscripted because the podcast isn't scripted either, but more freewheeling kind of the trains of thought we have, and just a general looser vibe. Give Jim a chance to stretch those green screen muscles, those sorts of things.
Green screen, what are you talking about? This is actually my house behind me.
Oh, right,
I have
right.
I have a library in my home.
Yeah, that's why you're so well read, and it's nice and still. Not a lot of foot
Yes.
traffic going on. All the things that are perfect, right, for a call or for a YouTube video or whatever it may be. So why don't we talk some current events here, because we do want to keep these kind of short, generally around 15 minutes or so, roughly. I think one of the things that we kind of talked about was what are the things that we worked on this week. I'll go first. Nothing other than invoicing and billing because I'm on vacation. So that's pretty much it. What about yourself, Jim?
Nothing super interesting, but I have been catching up on my identity podcast listening. Everybody knows I'm a big fan of the Risky Business podcast, and they've gone on vacation, and I'm pretty caught up on them. So I started to, explore deeper into like the KC podcast. Really fantastic, and I want to get more of those folks that have been on that podcast, mostly analysts from Carpenter Cole, get them onto the podcast. Um, One of the things they were talking about in this latest episode was um, the role of machine identities and where they fit into the identity fabric. And so I think identity fabric is a terminology that they're really using to talk about all the tools that manage identity and access, privilege access, things like that. And then machine identities has really grown from, it's traditionally any non-human ID, so a lot of computer accounts and service accounts. But now with operational technology and information technology kind of merging, and the edge computing stuff and all that, it's just the machine identities are multiplying. And then so how do they fit into that identity fabric? You know, how did they originate? What's their onboarding and offboarding process? How did they authenticate?
Mm-hmm.
Are you leveraging the enterprise tools for that, or is that something that stands alone?
Yeah, it's just some developer with a hard-coded script somewhere. They're running it like a sweatshop for bots somewhere within the organization. But
Well, that sometimes that's. I mean, let's face it. Sometimes that's what it takes. Is you have to reach the point where you fail in order. You have a crisis in order to take action.
yeah, it's funny you mentioned the word fail because I know we're going to talk here in a second about an article that you brought up earlier as we're kind of thinking about like what are we going to talk about for this show. Maybe we should just switch over to it now because I know there's a couple things that we want to look at. But speaking of fails, the 10 worst password snafus of 2021, and this is via Tech Republic. What are your thoughts?
Well, I love that image there with people writing down passwords, and I think sometimes we think, oh, we'll have these complex passwords, and that will make it harder to guess somebody's password and break in. And yeah, guessing someone's password is only one of the ways that people get in. One of the other areas is people write down passwords, people get their passwords phished, things like that. So I know that's not really the point of the article, but what I thought was interesting there is that graphic that they use. And then in terms of what they point to were a lot of the major headlines that occurred over the past year, and like SolarWinds was
Can you imagine
hitting
that
right
was a year
around.
ago?
That was a year ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting they put in February 2021 foreign hackers were able to access internal emails at government agencies, but what took when the SolarWinds thing went down, it was right over Christmas, and so I think what they're talking about is kind of the aftermath of that. It takes a while to even after you patch the hole, they've already gotten inside, they've already gotten access, and then trying to figure out what they have access to, where they're hiding.
Yeah.
That's sometimes a problem, even if you know they're hiding somewhere.
Well, that's it's not coincidence that these attacks happen around the holidays because there's less people in the office. Criminals know that just as much as anyone else trying to get access to data. There's less eyes on logs and things like that. So we had SolarWinds last year. We got Log4j this year, and obviously that's been exploited, out there a few times, at least at this point that we know of. So yeah, it's part of it.
When I look back on this year, I think there will be two things from an infosec standpoint that you think about. One is the pandemic, and really work from home became, I don't know if I want to say it's the norm, but it's accepted. And I think it's at the point now where if companies start saying to people, oh, you have to come into this office and travel an hour to and fro, or you're fired, people will say in mass, see
It's
you
the great
later.
resignation. This is what's going on right now.
Yeah, I'm going to go work somewhere else. So that's number one. So what that talked about was now the norm is people connecting from their home network, and think of all those different touch points that exist versus when people went and plugged into an on-prem network. I don't think that's ever going to go back 100%.
Yeah.
I don't even think it'll go back 50%. The second thing that I'll remember about this year was ransomware. And I mean, ransomware was just like in the news every week. Somebody new was getting cracked. There was the Colonial Pipeline in the U.S. became like probably the issue where people started, normal people who aren't in infosec started to
Right.
realize like how big of a deal this is because they couldn't get gas in certain states. I mean, I'm in a state where, I was driving around, hit 6 or 7 gas stations, and they were all out of gas.
Well,
Yeah, and so I mean, I think those are the things that people will think about, and passwords are a major part of of both of those problems, right? And when people work remotely, if you have to have a way to be sure that who they say they are, and how they authenticate is a big part of that. Getting away from passwords.
I think
the one
that's.
thing I was going to
Oh,
go ahead.
I just want because I think you're going almost right into this Ticketmaster story, which I thought was interesting because, passwords, and really now what we're talking about is in the story of the Ticketmaster one here is the case here is it was a contractor who worked for the competitor, Live Nation. It's linked, so you can look it up. We'll put a link to this in the show notes on YouTube, so you can check it out later. But contractor worked for Live Nation, went to Ticketmaster. Ticketmaster hired him on as employee, and then that individual used their contractor credentials from Live Nation to go back and pull data, and definitely, where they were trying to win back a client, is my understanding, and kind of things like that. But obviously the password, but knowing who your contractors are and then shutting down those accounts when they leave the organization, in this case, was a $10 million mistake, plus whatever repercussions there were with the client or other things that are downstream. So the 10 million is really just the fine. I'm sure it was more than that in other advances too, but I like that one. I like a good old fashioned corporate espionage that is based on just, yeah, they never shut down my account, so I just logged in.
Yeah. Well, a very similar thing happened in Major League Baseball a few years
Hmm.
ago. I think it was somebody worked for the Houston Astros,
All those
stole
Astros.
some yeah, stole. Well, the Astros ended up being the victim.
Yeah.
So the person went to work for the St. Louis Cardinals. If I'm getting this story right, if I'm not, I'm sorry. But then they went into their um, recruiting or their scouting system and stole all of this data.
Hmm.
It's just, it's hard to believe that people will do that, but it's the virtual version of going into somebody's house and stealing their stuff.
Yeah, they're walking away with it. And I think, another article that we want to kind of talk through here, and is also goes on with the password, is this one from Security Boulevard around passwords and the NIST guidelines. I think this is something that is still kind of getting out there. This is not a new recommendation from a NIST perspective around passwords, but the requirements of removing periodic password change. That's recommendation one, as you see here on the screen. But I think there have been lots of schools of thought on this over the last decade or so. Change your password every 90 days, 60 days, 30 days, right? Whatever the right cadence is. But as of a few years ago, this is not new. The recommendations from both NIST and Microsoft has been, no, that's not effective as a security option. What you really want to do is have a better password. Doesn't necessarily mean long, more complex, but a longer password, something that's going to take longer to crack. So this combination of recommendations that I saw around removing periodic password change, requiring length, but removing password complexity. And then I think the most important thing on this list is, if you're going to do those two things, is make sure you have screening of new passwords. So this is basically password checking, making sure that when you set up a password, you're not using SolarWinds123, for example, to come up with a password for things, that you're using something that's a little more, less. It makes sense to the user, and I think this is where passphrases come in, right? You come up with 3 or 4 or 5 different words that have some meaning, and you don't necessarily need to require at symbols and exclamation points and hash marks, right? And all these special characters that really kind of start to throw things out. But this is something that I saw this today again on Security Boulevard, and I thought I wanted to bring it up because I really kind of think touches back with some of the breaches that we've seen with reused passwords and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the crossroads of information security and human psychology. So when I have to change my password every 30 days, I'm just going to add an extra exclamation point, or I'm going to find some way to make it simple for me to remember. If I have to change every 90 days, maybe I'm going to use spring 2022, summer 2022, fall 2022. I mean, it sounds like almost like, who's going to do that?
Everybody's doing it.
A ton of people do it. And the thing is, the old ideas really don't work with the new ways that exploits are being done, which is, it's not that we have Jeff's ID and we're going to try 8,000 passwords, and you're like, aha, I'm only going to let you try it 5 times, so I'm going to lock out your account. The reason that doesn't work is that the new methodology is like, we're going to take the password spring 2022 and we're going to try and jam it against every account. Now, your lockout doesn't work for that, right? You might be able to identify my IP address, but if I switch my IP address enough, you're not even going to be able to do that, or if I slow roll it. So, because we can be pretty sure, if you're not screening for dictionary passwords or commonly used passwords and preventing people from using them, that someone's going to use them. And if we can guess every username, or somehow we got a source for your usernames, we're going to get there.
Yeah.
I think ultimately, one thing to think about, and I feel like I'm like slouching down in my chair. Like, you're not even going to see me.
Nobody puts Jimmy in the corner.
Yeah. But I am in the library and I'm not allowed to be so loud. No, I think this is the year where password list became, it's not a punchline at the end of every joke anymore, right? People are starting to believe that this is real and might work in their organization, and they're putting it in their roadmaps, and they're setting aside funding for it and saying, we're going to investigate it. That's different than, the full adoption of cloud SSO, like we're basically at this point, or we're 80-20, but you can see it coming.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the technology is there, the training of the users is there. Now they're used to using their phone, right, as an authenticative source, right? Whether it's the Microsoft app or the Okta app or Ping app or any other app, right, that has built-in MFA and things like that. So, I think there's still contingents of people out there who have this old mindset of, well, if you're making me use my phone, you've got to pay for it. That doesn't cut it, I think, anymore at this point. I think, that would have made sense like when you were, back in the old days, right, when we were paying like by text message and by data, and most things are unlimited now at this point. But yeah, I'm excited to see what 2022 is going to hold, especially with the password stuff, because I think there is a lot of momentum. We've got FIDO Alliance, we've got strong vendor capability in the space, and all the vendors are looking at this. This is definitely the future of authentication. So I think it's just a matter of when, not if. I think some organizations, the train that they might be operating is a little bit slow sometimes to shift directions or tracks or slow momentum and different things. But I think over the next couple of years, you'll start to see a lot more passwordless type approaches actually living, breathing in in the enterprise, rather than just kind of being a thought experiment at the point.
I know we're running out of time, but I want to talk about one other observation, which is passwordless vendors and KEEM vendors. KEEM being cloud infrastructure entitlement management. But just look at the explosion of that space, where you have like a dozen major players in each one of those areas, plus incumbent vendors in PAM and IGA and SSO, all trying to spin up their own passwordless or KEEM solutions. What's going to happen in that space? I don't know if 22 is going to be telling, or the space starts consolidating, or maybe one of these smaller vendors kind of breaks out. But something's going to happen, because it's not. We've seen this play out before, right? Where you have the large number of IGA vendors, but in the end of the day, it's kind of a couple of finalists that are really at the tip of everybody's tongue.
Yeah, I think we'll see some mergers and some acquisitions. I think the big players in a space, all the ones you're probably thinking about, CyberArk, Beyond Trust, Thycotic. I mean, it's clear that this is cloud infrastructure is not just a fad. It's not going to go away anytime soon. So,
no.
I think the identity component of it, and those products, the big vendors do have capability in space, but I think that they will start to bolster that. So it wouldn't surprise me if we see some consolidation in that space as well. Kind of a little bit of an arms race towards KEEM, cloud. I think it's cloud identity and entitlement management, but yeah, it's an interesting space for sure. All right, I think we went a little bit longer today than we normally do, but that's cool. We had a good conversation. Anything else you want to wrap up with before we call it quits?
No, I guess Merry Christmas to everybody. Thank you for continuing to follow us, and we have one more episode before the New Year's. Same time, same bat time, same bat channel next week.
Yep, idac.live. That'll take you right to our YouTube channel. And while you're here on YouTube, do the old thumbs up, subscribe, notify, all those cool things that would be nice if you did. Again, if you like the show, be sure to share it with folks. If you don't like the show, share it with your enemies. We don't care, as long as people are watching it. Thanks, Denise, for watching here. She's on here, so I'll bring her into the conversation. But appreciate it. Merry Christmas, Denise, and Merry Christmas to everyone else. And like Jim said, we'll see everybody next week. And that's pretty much it. So talk to you later.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Denise.